He is an amazing guy. I actually flew to Russia with him not too long ago. His name is Victor Sagalovsky, and he's going to be talking about the role of deuterium-depleted water. Victor doesn't believe in anti-aging, and he believes in pro-youthing. You know, he started out in his early 20s as an innovator in the plant-based culinary art and worked with organic raw foods, restaurants in the U.S. This led to a path of ceaseless scientific study, research, and product development in holistic health and human longevity. He's the author of the book, The Gold Catalyst of Radiant Health, a book about the history and science of the medicinal benefits of gold. He has studied the science of water for over 20 years and has a theory paper entitled Endogenous Radiation Damage Theory of Aging, where he proposes that our biggest obstacle to increased lifespan is the excess of deuterium in our biosphere and our cells. Let's give a round of applause to Victor Sagalovsky.
Thank you for the introduction. All right. Good afternoon. Thank you to the organizers of BioRegenesis, Dr. Jerry. I find it kind of ironic that we're going to talk about probably what is one of the most important discoveries in health and human longevity here in Reno at a casino, but God has a good sense of humor. So let's see here. This is going to be crash course in deuterium-depleted water, deuterium 101. I'm going to stretch you guys a little. I won't break you, I promise. And, okay, how do I operate this thing? How do I advance the slide? That's the thing, that's that. Okay, here we go. Okay, so what we're going to do first is we're going to understand what deuterium-depleted water actually is, and to do that, we have to understand what deuterium is. Some of you may already know, some not, so we're just going to start at the basics. Okay? So hydrogen has actually 3 isotopes. We won't talk about the third one, which is tritium. Doesn't really matter. What matters is hydrogen and deuterium. Now, hydrogen is the simplest element in nature, the first element created in the Big Bang, and deuterium is its cousin. It has an extra neutron. So as you can see here, 1 proton, 1 electron, 1 proton, 1 electron, and this neutron. This neutron doubles the mass of the hydrogen atom, which by the end of this talk, you're going to understand why this is so significant. Okay. Okay, so what happens is there's approximately 0.33 milliliters of heavy water in each liter of water. That's about 6 drops. It's not very much, but you're going to come to understand why this plays such a big role in our biology and why it really hampers our bioelectrical system and the energetic potential of our cells. So again, oops, let's go back one. Can I go back one? Red arrow, got it. Okay, so you see here, this is what regular water is, okay? So when hydrogen was, when the Big Bang happened, 13.7 billion years ago, the first element was created was hydrogen. Now the second element was helium. Unfortunately, in the first 5-10 minutes, I don't know how long exactly, I wasn't there, but as the universe started cooling, a little bit of this extra neutron that did not become nitrogen ended up becoming this heavier isotope of hydrogen, deuterium. So what you have here, when you look at a glass of water, there's not just water in there. There's 63 types of water because there's different isotopes of hydrogen and there's different isotopes of oxygen and then all their combinations. So this would be DHO or HDO, which would be heavy water. In heavy water, you still have one of the atoms in the molecule of water is hydrogen and one is deuterium. So that would be HDO. So what happens is because this is a heavier element, it has a stronger bond, a shorter bond angle, and it's harder to break that bond, and you're going to see why this has a negative effect on our physiology. Okay? All right, basic review. Heavy water is heavier than normal water. Normal water is heavier than light water, which is deuterium depleted. So if you look at all the natural water on the planet, you're going to see that most of it is, in fact, the correct water, which is H2O. 2 regular hydrogen, no neutron, and then a very small amount, which is roughly about 150 parts per million in regular water, is going to be this heavy water. Okay? And out of that, you also have these other constituents. You know, you have a different isotope of oxygen, oxygen 17, oxygen 18, not really important right now, and then a little bit of that few drops of deuterated water, or the heavy water of natural water, is going to be pure D2O, which is like the last slide where you saw it was HDO. It's going to be D2O. That doesn't occur in nature very often. It's actually made in the lab, but there's a very minute amount of it. Okay. So to put this in perspective, this is very new understanding to us. We haven't known this for not even 100 years. So if you look, 1932 was when they discovered that water even had a second isotope. Okay, this Dr. Urey, he actually won a Nobel Prize for this. So this is all fairly recent. This is why it's so exciting, because these things are coming at us quick, and we're understanding things more and more, and now we've reached the level where we're at. So this was 1932, and if you look at all the waters on the Earth, you're going to find that 3% of the Earth's water is fresh water, okay? 2/3 of that is frozen in glaciers and icebergs, not really accessible to us for drinking. So only 1% is available to drinking, okay? And out of that 1%, 99.9% falls in this 130 to 155 ppm range. As you get closer to the poles, you find that you have less deuterium. Excuse me. You see this right over here. This is the Himalayas. This is where the Hunza people live. The Hunza people were studied for their increased longevity, and then they found out what was the most common denominator among them that helped them live to, over 100 years of age, disease-free, was that they drank water that was 133 parts per million. In North America, where we are, we're looking at roughly at about 150 parts per million. LA is 150. Okay, if you're at the equator, you're going to find it's 155, and the lowest of all water on Earth is 89 parts per million of total deuterium in the water, HDO in this case. Okay, so why do we have so much deuterium in our bodies and in our atmosphere and in our oceans? Well, there's 2 theories actually, and Robert Slovak talked about one of them, is that we were bombarded by comets. When they analyzed comets, they measured at 155 to 160 parts per million. So that's one theory. There's another theory that's been advanced recently, is that we've had a series of nuclear wars and catastrophe in our ancient history, and even in our modern history. So that increases the amount of deuterium in the atmosphere. It's not a very popular theory, but there is some evidence that may have happened. Either way, if you look at the solar system on average has less deuterium than our planet. So the comets that created the water on our planet, let's just say that theory is the most popular one, is the reason why we have so much deuterium here. Now, we're going to find out why that is bad for us. Okay. Why is it destructive to life? which is what we all want to know. So for me, this is, I first found out about this when I read an article in 2004 about it. NASA scientists had written something about the Russian studies on deuterated water and the removal of deuterium. So I immediately got interested and I do a lot of research, forgot about it, it was in the back of my mind, and then it kept coming back more and more. So now we have brought a product to market, and for me this has been a 10-year process, a 10-year quest to actually bring this water to market and make it available to everybody else. Okay, so how does deuterium damage DNA? How does it damage mitochondria, enzymes? This leads to cell death. How does it do that? So let's find out. Okay, so before we find out, let's take a look at what happens when they did tests with purely heavy water. Now, pure heavy water would be that D2O molecule, right, where there's no hydrogen. It's all 2 neutrons in a configuration of water that is pure heavy water. This is the water they use in nuclear reactors and for other industrial processes. So when they did the tests on this, Russian Academy of Sciences, you can see what actually happens, the effects of drinking this. So you could see what happens to plants, what happens to animals, higher and lower life forms. But primarily, if you look at the higher animal study here, you find that mice drinking pure D2O died on the 5th day. So something's not right. And let's find out what that is. Oh, yeah, seeds didn't germinate. So many anti-life things happening from this heavier isotope of hydrogen. Okay. So again, we're going to put this into perspective because this is very, very new knowledge to us. And we're living in very exciting times to even have the ability to have discovered this. So if you look at it, deuterium as an isotope of hydrogen was discovered in 1932. 1942 was the first use of heavy water in a nuclear reaction. The first correlation to growth and longevity was done in 1958. Started in 58, concluded in 61. That was done in Russia. What happened was they identified a population in Yakutia, which is in Siberia, and they saw that this population had increased lifespan, and they were more energetic, and they wanted to know what it was. So they tried to correlate what was it that they had in common, and after a couple years, they found out that the water that they were drinking was significantly lowered in deuterium. And when I say significantly, it was about 135. So you may not think that that's very much, 15 parts per million, but it has a lot of significance. So the Americans were on it about 10 years later. They had read the Russian studies. They published in 1971. That was the first U.S. research. And then 1999 was the first conference on isotopic and molecular processes, which where they tried to actually start figuring out what, scientists got together and shared their notes, okay? In 2001, a Hungarian doctor, researcher, scientist named Schmelier published the biological effects of deuterium depletion, which was based on a book, which I will share with you later. Talk about that book. It's very significant because it was a study that was done on over 1,000 people. So on average, you have 0.1 ounce of a glass of water has DHO, okay? So that means you have 1 molecule of this heavy water per 6,600, roughly, molecules of regular water. It doesn't seem like much. However, in your electron transport chain, you're looking at 1 out of every 15 seconds, the mitochondria stutters and is not able to process this deuteron easily at all. So, what we have here is we find out that deuterium actually, because of this, makes up a large percentage of the elements in your body. And if this is not an element that we want, we come to realize that it is too much. So if you look at this chart, you see that magnesium, potassium, glucose, these are all molecules that are very important to us, and then you have deuterium. So you can see that there's quite a lot of it in our body. Okay? So how does deuterium do its damage? Can anybody complete this for me? Anyone? Roses are red, I wish you well. Nobody? Mitochondria. Anybody? There's a clue? Thank you. Roses are red, I wish you well. Mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. And this is where the magic happens, and this is where deuterium does its damage. Directly in our energy-producing mitochondria, all the way down into the ATP synthase, which I will talk about. So each cell contains hundreds to thousands, between 1,000 and 10,000 mitochondria, depending on the type and health of the cell. Inside mitochondria, there's thousands of submicroscopic protein nanomotors, and they look like little motors, and they spin very fast, 9,000 RPM. And they synthesize ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Adenosine triphosphate is the fuel of our biology, okay? And that gets recycled in your body, and every day you make more than your own body weight and recycle more than your own body weight of ATP. So it's constantly being produced, constantly being recycled, constantly being flushed out of your system, but mostly recycled. Under anaerobic stress, you flush it, and this is why you get tired, and it takes a long time to recover. Under normal conditions, it gets recycled to ADP and then gets reconverted back to ATP. So this is the body's main energy-carrying molecule. Okay, so back to the timeline, because I want to impress upon you how recent all this knowledge really is, and how you are really privileged to be at the forefront of understanding what is really going on and why we age. Okay, so mitochondria is a bacteria originally. Okay, now it's woven itself into our own DNA and the DNA of everything on the planet that's living, just about. So that happened 1.45 billion years ago, as scientists tell us. So these mitochondria invade eukaryotic cells. This was called endosymbiosis. And they become genetically entwined with life on Earth forever. Okay? In 1890 was the first time that mitochondria was actually discovered. And the term mitochondria is coined in 1898. So less than 100 years, or a little over 100 years ago. ATP was discovered in 1929, and in 1937, the Krebs cycle, also known as the citric acid cycle, was first discovered. And then it wasn't until the 60s that we discovered the electron transport chain and ATP synthase, which is that nanomotor that I've talked about, and I'm going to show you a little video of, that spins at 9,000 RPM to produce this ATP that gives us energy. Okay? So even though the Russians in the 60s figured out that they correlated that increased longevity of both plants and animals to lower deuterium, it was not until the early 70s that scientists by the name of Griffiths started theorizing why in fact this deuterium is bad for us. So what he postulated was, so what deuterium does, because it's heavier, it affects the shape of molecules. Okay, so in a place where you have you're supposed to have a hydrogen, if you have a deuteron, it's twice as heavy, things don't work quite well. So he wrote that deuterium adversely affects the shape of enzyme molecules which are involved in DNA replication. And what this is a stereoisomer. Now we have molecules in our body, enzymes and other molecules, that have what's called chirality. And what that is like mirror opposites. So if you have, assuming you have a molecule like this that has a hydrogen here and a hydrogen here, and they're mirror opposites, but what happens if you have deuterium here and a hydrogen here? So imagine if you're a pilot and you're flying a plane, and one wing, everything looks the same, but one wing is heavier than the other. It's going to be a lot harder to fly. And this is exactly what's happening in our body. By changing the shape of our molecules, it starts these problems upstream. Okay, when I say upstream, this is the fundamental reason problems downstream exist, is something happened upstream at the source. So the way DNA bends is affected, the way molecules are structured is affected, the way they're shaped is affected, and especially with these stereoisomers. So keep that analogy in mind. If you have a plane, one wing is heavier than the other, it's going to be harder to fly. Okay, so how does deuterium damage mitochondria? Well, you have that little nanomotor called ATP synthase, and every 15 seconds it stutters because it has these positions for a proton of hydrogen, but when a proton that has a neutron attached comes, it doesn't know what to do. It stops spinning. It stutters. So, and that decreases your total energy output potential. So if you remove that, you can actually increase your energy making potential by up to 3 times. And the analogy I like to make is that everything is, your husband or your wife, you get up in the morning, you kiss them, they kiss you back, everything is fine, and then 1 out of every 6,600 times, you get smacked in the face. Okay? And it happens repeatedly, over and over. The elbow in the face. You don't know when it's coming because it's not an exact 6,600 steps, but you know it's coming. Over time, you're going to expect it's coming, and you're going to start breaking down. You're going to start anticipating it. You're going to have muscle memory. You're going to know that something bad is about to happen. And this is what happens every 15 seconds inside the mitochondria in the ATP synthase nanomotor. And this is an illustration that we're going to play for you. How do we play this slide? This is an embedded slide. If somebody can press play, then you can see how these little nanomotors actually operate, because it's pretty cool. Okay. Is that going to do it? No. Sorry for the technical difficulty here. Oh, no, I don't want that one. Yeah, let me see here. Can you guys play it? Okay. Is that a no? Oh, they're not on the internet. Okay. Well, that's unfortunate. Oh, it's too bad because, these videos are on YouTube, so you can actually see it. But what happens is there's these 2 rotors. Can you do it? Okay, we'll try. Otherwise, I'll do the dance of ATP synthase. So one like this, one like this. And remember, we just discovered this in the 60s, so this is fresh off the press. What's that? Okay. Anyway, what happens is this ATP synthase. Just mute it, please. And you have to advance the. I had it positioned at the right. We're just going to watch the whole thing. So what happens here is there's an extracellular, there's a inner membrane, there's a membrane, and the intercellular space, extracellular space, and it's going to start at about 55 seconds. You're going to go through all this. But what I want you to see is that nanomotor called ATP synthase. Thanks, Robert. You're deep inside the mitochondria. These are the sphingosides. This is the membrane, and there's that little motor. Okay, so you have the protons on the other. You have the protons on one side, protons on the other. It creates a gradient. That differential allows this ATP synthase motor to spin. There's the stator. That's the static part. The proton comes in. It goes down, and then ADP comes in. Phosphorus gets added, becomes ATP. Pretty simple, okay? And that's happening actually 9,000 RPM per second. So that's quite significantly slowed down. But that's a hydrogen proton. So imagine what happens. It's got that space in there for a proton, but now you introduced a neutron. It doesn't know what to do with it. It stutters. It damages the motor. Over time, it causes significant damage. The motor stops. Your cell starts dying, and you get a chain reaction. So essentially, this is how it works. It's pretty neat because these are, they've actually photographed these in a microscope. They're very small, and it's a real nanomotor. It's spinning, it's working, it's doing its magic. ADP goes in, ATP goes out. Boom. Okay. That's what I wanted you to see. So now I think you guys understand that what's going on with that neutron. It has no place or function there. And the nanomotor, it's mitochondria hasn't really evolved to properly deal with that deuteron, that extra neutron in the deuterium. Okay? All right, we can move on. Thank you. Okay, so this creates a cascade effect. So this is a simple graph that shows you the increase of deuterated ATP synthases and decrease of ATP production over time. As time increases, more stuttering happens, and then ATP production goes down until you have apoptosis, which is cell death, senescence, apoptosis, and cell death. So this is what happens to us over time, and this is in my theory, and other people agree with this, that this is the primary cause of our aging process. Okay, so less ATP means reduced bioenergetics of the cell. Reduced energy promotes an accumulation of DNA errors as we age. DNA errors in transcription, like I said, leads to cell death, mutation, and rise in neoplastic diseases. We get more cancers and more problems when we have less energy to deal with them. And this is another simple graph that shows you number of deaths from cancer per 100,000 people of a specified age. So as it's a very simple correlation. As we get older, DNA errors increase. As DNA errors increase, gives rise to all kinds of diseases, including neoplastic diseases, i.e. cancer, and other things. So let's review some studies, because people have been working on this for over 25 years. So one of the studies is radiation protection. This is appropriate and important for us in this day and age, where we have so much radiation in our atmosphere since the first nuclear bomb went off, and everything else in our atmosphere that causes hot particles. And not only beta and gamma radiation, but also alpha particles and all kinds of radiation. So these guys figured out in a study of mice that when they gave mice water, DDW as it's called, deuterium depleted water or light water, 15 days at 30 parts per million, and subjected them to a sublethal dose of radiation, the survival rate was 61% greater than the control group. So this is statistically significant. And they also maintain normal white blood cell and red blood cell platelet counts as compared to the control group. That's a significant study. So they proposed that the reason that happened is deuterium slows down the rate of mitosis and can conceivably have adverse effects during the S phase of cell division when DNA is most susceptible to radiation. So They concluded that it is conceivable that mice with lower levels of deuterium in their systems would have benefited from less error-prone cell division and more effective repair of radiation damage. We know 100% certainty that drinking deuterium-depleted water lowers your body burden of deuterium. So what you infer from that, such as studies like this, you come to realize that it has positive benefit for our health, and that anything with too much deuterium has a negative life-shortening benefit, non-benefit. Okay? This is a particularly interesting study done by the Russians. What they did was they took so every state and county in the United States publishes the deuterium content of their tap water. So what they did was basically just correlation between depression and deuterium rich water. And it turned out that it was statistically significant. So as you go higher latitudes, you have a slightly less deuterium, okay? Looking at 135 to 140 up in the northern states and down to up to 155 in the lower states. And then they created this map where they found that depressive conditions, this was purely extrapolated from data of depressive conditions, published studies, and or published clinical statistics, and deuterium correlation in different states. So it was really interesting because it had a statistical significance. And then another famous book, this is the one I alluded to earlier, by Dr. Schmalier, was Defeating Cancer. So what he did was he took 8 years, 350 tons of deuterium-depleted water, over 1,200 patients, and he produced over 14,000 pages of documentation trying to understand if drinking deuterium-depleted water had any effect on cancer. And his conclusion was that the interim evaluation confirmed a significant difference between the control group and treated groups with respect to the examined parameters that indicated the anti-tumor effect of the deuterium-depleted water preparation. So to translate that for you, he said yes, drinking deuterium-depleted water had a direct effect on people's well-being and their recovery from neoplastic conditions, i.e. cancer. Okay, so there's also a conference that happens. There's been 3 of them so far, where the top scientists and minds in the world that study these things, deuterium, meet in Budapest, Hungary. And there was some interesting conclusions from the second Congress, which showed that the positive influence of drinking light water on blood chemistries included a significant reduction of glucose, cholesterol, erythrocyte sedimentation rates, leukocyte counts, and cortisol, which is a stress hormone level, while also revealed an increase in antioxidant capabilities or capacities. So this is in line with other studies I've read, where people that have consumed deuterium-depleted water over time not only lowered their stress levels, their cortisol levels, but also needed less sleep, and cognitive improvement was increased, along with a number of other significant factors, such as these glucose, cholesterol, et cetera, et cetera. And they consumed 1 liter of light water per day. In this case, I believe it was 25 ppm to 85 ppm. I'm not sure exactly which one, but seeing that the Hunza people have an extended lifespan and they consume deuterium-depleted water at 135 or 133 to 135 ppm, even a slight reduction in deuterium has a great significance. Okay, so this one is really interesting to me because this illustrates some of the short-term benefits that somebody may have, that not necessarily depleting deuterium over time, but maybe in an athletic event, kind of like what Tyler did earlier today, running the half marathon. So what you see here is very interesting because this is the change of physical performance after water consumption in humans. So this is the change of physical work capacity. And another Russian study actually. So you can see that by drinking deuterium-depleted water immediately before a event in which physical exertion was needed, that there was an increased, marked, significant boost in physical capacity to perform work. And this other study also shows this. So what this one is showing you, using a veloergometer, like this gentleman on a bicycle pedaling, to produce the amount of the energy, the calories needed to produce the same amount of energy as correlated by beats per minute of your heart, was significantly less. So if you look at, So if you look at what happened here, this is regular water. This is the energy that's needed in calories. So by drinking deuterium-depleted water, this athlete was able to maintain the same amount of calories burned, and the increase in calories and heart rate was significantly reduced here. This is the energy cost. Okay, so basically, this correlates to that 3x increase in the energy capability of your cell when you remove the deuterium that is stuttering your ATP synthase every 15 seconds. So this is not something that you have to wait months to get. This is an immediate benefit that you can experience by drinking deuterium-depleted water. Excuse me. So what happens when you deplete your body of deuterium? And this is a synopsis of the published studies. You have an increased survival time in multiple types of cancer, as proven by the work of Dr. Schmelier and others. You can slow or reverse tumor development, improve mental health, dramatically increase physical performance, and this contributes to extended lifespan and higher quality of life. And now we're going to go into how deuterium-depleted water is made. Unfortunately, it's very difficult. That's the problem. You can't take it out with regular filtration, reverse osmosis, electrolysis. It's very difficult to do, to separate that HDO, because even though it's so little in a glass of water, it's very hard to remove. So what we have to do is we have to replicate the water cycle, the hydrological cycle, and we have to optimize that and increase the time. We have to boost the hydrological cycle, intensify it essentially. So what these are columns. These are giant vacuum distillation rectification columns. They can be anywhere from 30 to 70 feet tall, and the taller they are, the more deuterium-depleted water you can grab out of them. So essentially, because HDO has a different boiling point, has a different melting point than regular water, in that phase change, we're able to pull it out. And so this takes a lot of energy. So in Russia, we have probably about more than 50 of these columns working 24 hours to remove deuterium to produce light water. So the higher the column, the easier it is to get a lower concentration of deuterium-depleted water. So this takes an incredible amount of energy, and that is the reason why there's just not that much of this water available. It's a long and difficult process, and hopefully sometime in the future somebody will figure out an easier way. But in the last 50 years, this is as far as science and technology has gone in removing the deuterium. It works very efficiently, but it takes a lot of power. So there are other ways to lower deuterium content of your body, not just drinking deuterium-depleted water. In fact, if you drink deuterium-depleted water, you will want to do some of these other things as well. So you can ensure a total body burden of deuterium is lowered from 150 down to 115 is a very good place to be, or lower even. And the reason is because it increases the bioenergetics of the cell, so you have more energy to do work, you have more energy to combat disease. The body's a self-healing organism, so more energy translates into higher efficiency. So if you look at fat is naturally deuterium depleted. So if exercise burns approximately 120 grams of fat per hour, so that means that 3 to 4 hours of mild exercise produces yoga, running, whatever it is, weightlifting, walking even. So it produces 300 to 400 milliliters of 60 to 80 ppm deuterium depleted water. That's what your cells make. Your cells make deuterium depleted water. So that's why when you exercise, you keep improving. You exercise for a month, you build muscle, your cardiovascular gets better, and you can continually improve and improve and improve because you're depleting your deuterium. Okay, so now, what else does it? Fasting and ketogenic diet. I'm going to explain why fasting is really good for you. I'm going to explain why ketogenic diet works, purely from a scientific basis. So fasting, this is something that I practice. It's my little health secret that I share with all of you. So what I like to do is dry fast, something I found out about 5 years ago. Before that I was doing water fast, and I read a book by a Ukrainian physician that had written a book about dry fasting. Dry fasting is when you remove not only food, but you remove water as well. So when you remove water, to explain it simply, all the cells start competing for food, for water. So a lot of the cells that are on their way out through autophagy just get recycled quicker, and your entire organism gets optimized. So anyway, this doctor in the Ukraine found out that when he dry fasted survivors of Chernobyl that had developed cancer, he was able to cure them from cancer or put them into remission. I know cure is a trademark word, as we found out yesterday. So he's able to put them to remission. And the people that, his patients that refused to dry fast, they all perished, they all died from their cancerous condition. So what happens when you dry fast? Every 2.4 pounds of fat burned creates 1 liter of deuterium depleted water. Why is fat burned when you dry fast? Very simple. Fat is a molecule which has hydrogen attached to carbon. The hydrogen is cleaved off of the carbon, combines with the oxygen that you inhale, and produces cellular water. So if I dropped, my longest dry fast is 6 days. So if I dropped about 20 pounds of fat from my body, I get really skinny when I dry fast. Excuse me. That produced 8 liters of light water, deuterium depleted water, at approximately 60 parts per million. So that is a great way to produce deuterium depleted water and decrease your total body burden of deuterium. And this is why fasting, as people have been saying, is a key way to reset the biological clock. Okay? And now I'm going to explain to you why a ketogenic diet is beneficial. So, like I said earlier, each day we make and recycle our own body weight of ATP. So that means 10 to 60 million ATPs per second per cell. And that's at a cost of 1,500 to 10,000 smacks or hits on your nanomotors, right? So for every 10 million processes of producing ATP that work successfully, 1,500 of those make your ATP synthase motor stutter and ultimately cause damage and ultimate breakdown of your ATP synthase nanomotor. So if you look at it, this is very simple. This is something I learned about 15 years ago, and it's what made me transition to a higher fat diet. So glycolysis, which is the creation of ATP without oxygen, creates only 2 to 4 ATP molecules. Glucose metabolism produces 34 molecules of ATP. Now get this, one ketone body, which is basically running off of fat, right? Acetoacetate, 104 ATP molecules. This is the reason why a ketogenic diet is more beneficial than anything else, because you produce more energy, you produce more ATP. And this is why when you expose yourself to red light, to sunlight, that allows more mitochondria to form in your body. Exercise creates more mitochondria. So the more mitochondria you have, the more ATP you produce, the more fat you eat, the more efficient that ATP synthase and the electron transport chain can work to produce ATP. So you have a lot more energy. You know, when you're very young, you have a lot of mitochondria. Your body is very optimized. As we get older, we lose mitochondria, we lose our ability to produce ATP, and this is why we get sluggish and slow down, but we don't have to. As we've seen, there's many people of an advanced age that have the energy of a 20-year-old, and the reason is because whatever they're doing to increase their mitochondria, and whatever they're doing to increase the ability of that mitochondria to produce ATP. So this is the water that we've started to manufacture and import into the United States. We do it in Russia because power is cheap, and they've been at the forefront of this research for a very long time. And it took a long time to translate a lab setup of creating deuterium depleter to a commercial system. As you saw, you have over 50 of these columns that are computer controlled, running complex software, constantly monitoring everything. So what we've done is we've imported this water, which is 10 parts per million and 5 parts per million. And as far as I know, this is the lowest deuterium content that exists on the planet. Certainly, it's artificially made, but we just replicate the water cycle, as I said earlier, and we optimize it for efficiency and are able to remove most of the deuterium in regular water. So it's basically just distilled water with most of the deuterium removed. And the reason we go through this labor-intensive process, this painstaking process to remove the deuterium down to 5 parts per million, is so you can mix it with any regular water to get the desired concentration that you want. And that's what this tells you here, because we want to create some value for people. So if you are a crazy biohacker and you want to push the limits of what's biologically possible, you might drink 10 ppm every day and see what happens, deplete your deuterium levels faster, or you may want to combine it with 8 liters, you may want to combine 2 liters with 8 liters of regular water, and you get to 122 parts per million, which is still a significant reduction in deuterium. And over time will deplete you down to a manageable level where you can have a lot of energy and stay ahead of all diseases. And this chart illustrates what actually happens over time. This is something that you want to, once you start drinking deuterium-depleted water, once you get in a deuterium-depleted lifestyle, you want to continue to do this over time. As you see here, if you have 60 parts per million, if you take that 5 or 10 part per million water that we have and combine it with regular water to get 60 ppm, you will find that if you drink 1 liter per day, in 45 days, you will deplete your body down to 117 parts per million of deuterium, which is fantastic, because you've now increased the bioenergetics of the cell significantly enough to stay ahead of all disease and maybe slow down the aging process quite significantly. Pro-youthing. So this is an example. So if you're paying $10 for 103 ppm DDW, which is a really good place to start, you can see that if you do it, it costs you even less if you want to be at 115 or 122. So what this is basically saying is that this makes it accessible to all. It's about the cost of what you spend on coffee per day at Starbucks, or maybe even less. The only issue is there's not enough of it right now in the world for everybody that wants it. But we're going to change that in the years to come as more awareness comes about the significance of deuterium-depleted water, or light water. And there is a center now in partnership with UCLA. It's called the Center for Deuterium Depletion down in Los Angeles. And what they do is they can measure your total body burden of deuterium. Now, I will tell you that 99.9% of the people here, maybe even 100, are between 145 and 155 parts per million. Still, it's good to test and find out, because that will be a good baseline that you can start a deuterium-depleted lifestyle and then come back in 2-3 months and test yourself and see what's actually happened. Okay? This slide got cut off because the PowerPoint I submitted wasn't in the proper format, but what that did say, if you were able to read it, that they use different methods of measuring. They use advanced spectroscopy, stable isotope spectroscopy, and they're able to take samples of your water vapor from your breathing. They're able to take samples of urine, et cetera, et cetera. And my time is almost over, so I'm just going to go through this really quick. Basically, there's 3 players in the world: Preventa, Claravia, and us. We have the lowest amount of deuterium available, 5 ppm, again, called light water. And the conclusion is right here on the board. So this is one of the most significant discoveries for human health and longevity, or for plants and animals as well. So it has a direct positive effect, measurable benefit at the cellular level. Over time, it will help protect the body and enable it to function more efficiently at a peak energy and performance, and can protect the DNA and assist in repair of damage caused to DNA, and keep the body youthful and keep you free of disease and stay ahead of the pollution. So there is no greater risk to a healthy life more significant than deuterium, in my opinion. And as I've said before, deuterium-depleted water may well be the most important health discovery of our time. You heard it right here in Reno.
In a casino.
Thank you.